Hi everyone, myself Dr. M. Lakshmi Prasad, working as an associate professor in the Department of Data Science in Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. In this video, I am going to discuss about various types of data representation in data management and representation. So when it comes to data and presentation, so any observation is going to be collected in respect of any characteristic or event is nothing but a data. And the data after collection, what we have to do, we have to process it and we have to analyze in accordance with the outlines laid down for the purpose at the time of developing the research plan. And technically, if I'm going to speak that the processing of data implies to organize and presentation of data, and this organization is going to be stored in two ways like editing and classification, and presentation of data is to be done in two ways like tabulation and diagrammatic presentation. So these are the some of the basic things about the data and presentation. So any observation or collected in respect of any characteristic or event is nothing but a data. And the data once we collected, then this data is going to be processed and going to be analyzed in accordance with the outlines laid down for the purpose and the time for developing a research plan. And the technically speaking processing of data is going to be implies to organize and presenting the data, and this organization can able to done in two ways like editing and then classification, and presentation can also be done in two ways like tabulation and diagrammatic presentation. So organization of data, so very first thing is we have to editing. So in what we have to edit the data, that thing we have to be remember. And so the process of examining the collecting of raw data and is going to be detect errors and omissions to correct when this is possible. And it also involves a careful scrutiny of the completed questionnaires and the schedules, and it should also done to ensure that the data is going to be accurate one or consistent with other facts that is going to be gathered and uniformly entered, and have a large well organized to facilitate the coding and tabulation. And there are two types of editing. First one is field editing and second one is central editing. So the organization data very first phase is that the editing phase where we can able to process this raw data in order to find any data, any errors are available or any omission has to be takes place, and we have to be correct these whenever going to be possible. And it should be very important to make a careful study to complete the questionnaires and then schedules. And editing is going to be done to ensure that the data what we projected it should be accurate one, and it should be consistent or not, or any other fact that is going to be gathered, and is to be well organized to facilitate the coding and tabulation. And there are two types of editing, like field editing, and second one is the central editing. So if I'm going to take this field editing, so the field editing should be done immediately only after the interview, and preferably on the very day or next day. And it is necessary in the view that the individual writing styles can also can be difficult to others and difficult to be understand. And researcher reviews the reporter forms for completing what was written in observed forms or in an illegal forms the time of recording the respondent responses. And when if I will go for the central editing, so it should be done whenever all the forms were completed. Through thorough editing, it has to be done by a single researcher for a mine, and then the team of experts, if it should be a large sample. And editor may able to correct obvious errors like entry in wrong place or entry recorded in months and instead of weeks, like that. So if any missing information is done, then editor can able to determine the response by reviewing other information and contact the respondent for the classification. So these are the two types of editing. So very first thing is that central editing, and second one is the field editing. So field editing means so should be done after the interview and preferably on the next day or very on the day itself, and it should be necessary to view the data. That individual writing styles can often be difficult to the others to understand, and the researcher reviews the reported forms for completing what they written in observation forms or in an illegal form that may be at the time of recording the respondent responses. And similarly, if I go for the central editing, it should be done when all the forms are completed and returned to the office. And so through thorough editing, the single researcher for a minor, and then the team experts is going to be done and show if the sample is going to be launched. And editor may also be correct these obvious errors like entry in wrong place and entry recorded months of weeks like this. So if any kind of information should also be done, then that should be determined by reviewing the other information and contact the respondent for clarification. And this second phase is that classification, so where the organization is going to be done. So if I go for if I'm going to take this, then what will happen is there are this phenomenon is going to be divided further into according to attributes and then according to the class intervals. So if I'm going to take according to the attributes, so the data may be either descriptive or it may be a numerical data. So descriptive in the sense like it may be a sex or it may be a honesty, and if it is numerical means height and weight. And it should also refers to the qualitative phenomenon which cannot be measured quantitatively, and it should be a simple or it may be manifold. So simple means I can able to take only one attribute, and manifold means we can able to take many attributes. Like so, according to these attributes, the data is going to be divided into different types, like a descriptive and numerical, and then should we can also take some of the measures for the qualitative data, and that the attributes what I'm going that should be simple or it may be manifold. Similarly, if I'm going to consider according to the class intervals, so the quantitative data phenomenon can be measured through some units, and it is going to be classified based on the class intervals. So, example, the persons with uncertain amount of income is going to be considered, right? So, the quantitative phenomenon means we are able to measure through units only, like so if I'm going to take height in centimeters and weight in kgs like this, and this should be classification and also be done only on the class intervals. So example, the person with certain amount of income like that. And so this if I'm going to take according to the characteristics, if I'm going to make a classification, so according to the characteristics, there may be a geographical classification, and there may be a chronological classification, and there may be a qualitative classification, and next one is quantitative classification, right? So like this we can able to divide or organize the data. If I'm going to take some of the characteristics like geographical classification, where we can able to geographical data like maps, and then climate conditions like this. And chronological classification, where you can able to organize the data in the form of any serial order. And next one is that qualitative classification. So this qualitative classification means of again it should be a two types. So if I'm going to take the gender, means it may be male or female, and or otherwise literate or illiterate. These kind of things of data can able to focus on the qualitative classification. If I go for manifold, this should be under time of classification. So similarly, if I'm going to take the quantitative one, so here the data may be, so just know what I said, the height should be in centimeters. And so if I'm going to take this manifold classification, so what should be the manifold classification? So this manifold classification means where the classification of data can be done more than the characteristics. Like suppose gender, if I'm going to take, so this gender is again divided into boys and girls, and again these boys will be again of the type like vegetarian or non-vegetarian. Again the girls should be of the type vegetarian or non-vegetarian. So if I'm going to take this again this vegetarian category, so how many number of boys that should comes under age of less than 20 and greater than 20. Similarly, non-vegetarian if I'm going to take, so how many number of boys that can able to comes under age 20 and then greater than 20, like this. Like this, we can able to make the classification what we call it as a manifold classification. And simple classification means where the gender is going to be divided into different types like boys and girls. So that should be a simple classification, right? So where can able to classify data with only one characteristics. More than that. So next one, presentation of the data. So where how can one able to represent this data is going to be presented. So for that I have two types of presentation what we have. So for the first thing is the table presentation, and second one is that visual presentation. So this again this visual presentation is further classified into two types like graphical presentation and then diagrammatical presentation. So table presentation means we're able to represent the data in the form of tables. So that one you can able to call it as table presentation. And visual presentation means again it is of two types like graphical. So where I can able to represent the form of line graph, or I can able to represent in the form of bar graph. And again this to be of different types. And diagrammatic representation, pie chart, bar chart, like this. And diagrammatic representation where you can able to represent the form of various type of where the graph is going to be represent the form of various diagrams, like that. So this and all will be the different types of presenting the data. So what are the uses and then principles of this presentation? So if I'm going to make use of this presentation, what will be the use is that so the user can able to understand and easy a better understanding of the subject, and should also provide the first hand information, and it should also helpful in future analysis, and it should also be easy in making comparisons, and it should be very attractive. And the principles of this presentation means so the data should be represented in simple form, and which can also arouse interest in reader, and it should be also concise without losing the important points, and it should also facilitate the future analysis, and we can also define the problem and should also suggest a solution. These are some of the principles of the presentation. So uses of presentation means that so it should be easy and better understanding of the subject, and should also provide the first-hand information, and it should also helps in future analysis and making the comparisons, and should be very attractive. And the principles of presentation means so the data should be presented in simple form, and we can also arouse some of the interest in reader, and we should also concise some of the important point, and we should also facilitate the future analysis, and we should also define and suggest a solution. So these are some of the uses and then principles of this presentation. So very first thing is the tabulation. So what is this tabulation? We'll see now. So the tabulation means it should be a systematic and logical arrangement of the classified data into rows and columns. And importance is that so it should be able to simplify this complex data, and necessary details and repetitions can be avoided, and it also facilitate the comparison, and it also gives some of the identity of data, and then it also reveals the pattern within which the figures which cannot be seen in the narrative form. So what is this means? The tabulation means it should be nothing but the systematical and the logical arrangement of the classified data into rows and columns. And this, what is the importance of this means? So the way the data what I get should be organized. Normally, the data what I'm getting should be very complex data. This should be what we call it as raw data, and this raw data can be provide some structure which is going to be represent, so that so what will happen is unnecessary details can be avoided, and repetition should also be avoided, And the comparison, if I want to make, so the comparison can also be done very quickly when I'm going to take this. And it should also identify the data, like, so what, where the data is going to be getting, so what is the serial number of the data, and which also reveals the pattern with figures and cannot be seen in the narrative form. So what are the principles of this tabulation? So where the tables can be should be assigned to the table, where the table number should be assigned, and the title has to be given, it should be concise and self-explanatory. That means that so can able to provide some title to the table, so that where the table getting and what is the brief description of this table, what is going to be referred that, and so the contents of the table has to be defined clearly. So whenever I'm going to represent it, the show in the header and then what the rows is representing should be properly mentioned, and what are the units should be clearly specified, and head note to be written. And the stubs means where the classification which are going to be found left side of the body, what we called as the stubs. And footnotes, any statements are noted in structure. And source note means source of statistics, and body mean main part of the table. So these are the sum of these various principles of this tabulation, right? So where I can able to represent the data in the form of table, the table number, and then the table title, and various stubs of the table, and footnotes, what is this meant for, and what is that, what is the source note, and what should be the main body part of the table, like that. So what kind of precautions do you have to be considered while creating this table? So the table should cut in, should show the size of the paper, and the captions and stuff should be arranged in some systematic order, and unit of measurement should be clearly defined and should be given in the table, and figures should be rounded to avoid unnecessary details in the table, and footnote to this effect should be given, right? So these are the sum of this precautions one have to be considered. So the table should show the size of the paper, and the captions and stuff should be arranged in systematic order, and we have to be make use of clear measurements should be defined while defining and given in the table, and the figure should be rounded to avoid unnecessary details in the table, and footnote to this effect should be given. So normally there are different types of tables, and it is going to be transferred some of the factors based on the purpose, and on the basis of the content the tables are going to be organized. So if I'm going to take this purpose, based on the purpose, so these tables are divided into two categories, like reference table and then text table. And similarly based on the content means the data is going to be divided into simple table and then complex table. So again, if we consider this complex table, so the table should be double table, triple table, and multiple tables. So like this, and the tables are going to be classified. So these are the contents of the various types of the table. So the basic purpose of the table, if I'm going to consider what should be the reference table and then text table. So these are the table that comes under the category based on the purpose. Similarly, based on the content, if I'm going to take, so what should be a simple table and what should be the complex table. So based on this content, so what you have to do is, so this content is nothing but simple table and then complex table. And if I'm going to take this complex table again further divided into double table as a thing, and triple table and then multiple table. Like this, we can able to classify the data into different types. So but let's see one by one what should be the reference table. So the table presents the original data and then reference purpose, and should also contain absolute figures, round numbers, and percentages. So these are the some of the uh, content about this reference table. So the table is going to be represent the original data for the reference purpose, and it also contains some figures, round numbers, and the percentages. So reference means that the slides are there, so S1, S2, and S4, and where can able to extract the slides, and then what type of period to increase in distance from the last completion. Like this, I can able to somehow make references here. And that if I'm going for the text table, so this text table is going to be constructed to present the selected data from one or more general purpose table. So already we have some general purpose tables. From that, what we have to select some of the data, and then what we have to do, we have to construct that. So that should be the text table, and then it should be able to bring out the specific point of answer to the specific question, and it should also include ratios, percentages, and averages, and it should also be found in the body of the text. So if I look at this system text table, so I can have a systematic structure, syntax, and linguistic features. So other kind of tables what we have is simple tables and double tables. So simple tables means where the data is going to be related to only one characteristic like method uh, and number. So here there should be only one characteristic I have like absence, condoms, index tables, normal blank fill like this. So if I'm going to specify only for the single attribute or single characteristic, then I have that should be the simple table. And double table means that should be related to only the two characteristics, so male and female like this. And if I'm going to take male, again I'm going to take two more characteristics. So what is the sports utility vehicle and sports car like this. And similarly if I'm going to take female, so again this one should be of different types and different characteristics that I'm going. So female means so how many number of females are going to be utilize the sports utility vehicle like SUV, and suppose sports car, how many number of females are collecting. So like this should be represented in the form of based on two characteristics, that will be what we call as a double table. And next one is the triple table and manifold table. So triple table means where the data is going to related to the three characteristics, and uh, next one is the manifold table. So where the data is going to related to more than three characteristics. So triple means that so the data relating only the three characteristics. So it should be so likely to buy, unsure, unlikely buy. So that should be have three characteristics. What should be version 1, 2, and then 3. So commercial view. So that should be triple tables where the data is going to be represented having three characteristics. Then it should be considered as a triple table. And next one is that manifold table. So the data is going to be related to more than three characteristics. So then it should be uh, manifold table. So manifold means that so where there's more than three characteristics I'm going to consider. So like suppose I'm going to consider the boys. So how many number of boys are married, unmarried. So for the rural boys, and similarly for other characteristic urban, how many number of married and unmarried for the urban boys. And so this should be the first characteristic, and this characteristic further divided into two more characteristics and like this. And again this one is going to further divide into different levels. So this should be manifold table, right? So this should be about this presenting the data. So what are the various types of presenting data, and in what we're going to be organizing the data. So in this video what I said is that so what should be the data. So the data is nothing but observed collection respective of any characteristic or event, that is nothing but the data. And this data is going to be processed and should be analyzed according to the outlines what they laid out for the purpose at the time of developing the research plan. And technically speaking this organization can be done in two ways, like editing phase and then classification. So where you can able to editing the data and we can able to classify the data based on characteristics, and the presentation also to be done so based on two ways like tabulation and then diagrammatic. So editing means there should be the process of collecting the raw data and going to be detecting the errors and omissions of the data in order to correct whenever it is possible. And there are two types of editing is to be done, like field editing and then central editing. So there are two types of editing, like field editing and central editing. So field editing should be done immediately after the interview, whereas the central editing should be completed in advance and then going to be returned to the office. And it is necessary to view the data is going to be that individual writing styles, so that should be difficult to understand. But here thorough editing has to be done by the single researcher itself. So for a major and the minor uh, modification if the sample size is going to be large. And similarly, the researcher review the reported forms and for completing whenever it is going to be written observated forms or illegal forms. But here the editor may have going to be correct the obvious errors like entry in the wrong place or entry in recorded like this. Then classification, normally this classification of the data can be done into different factors if I'm going to consider. So very first thing according to the phenomena. So this one means first according to the attributes and then according to the class intervals. So these attributes means the data is going to be either descriptive or it may be numerical one. So if it is descriptive, then it should be qualitative data, and if it is numerical, then it should be quantitative data. Similarly, this going to be quantitative means where the data is going to be represented in some measures, and according to the class interval means, so normally this should be quantitative phenomenon where we are able to represent the values in the class intervals. So like example, the person is certain amount of, and similarly this organization of the data, again if I'm going to take it out, then it should be based on the classification I can able to done that. So like uh, if I'm going to take the classification according to based on the characteristics. So this one is going to be classified in different types like geographical, chronological, and qualitative and quantitative. Again, this qualitative again of two types like simple means simple classification means gender, male, female, literate, or male, literate, like this. Like so, where the classification of the data done based on the one characteristics. Like if we take gender, only two characteristics that is coming boys and girls. That's it. And manifold means where the uh, attribute is going to be further divided into different subcategories and sublevels. Then presentation of data. So normally this presentation of data also be classified in two types. What I said previously is that so table presentation and visual presentation. And so this visual presentation means where the data is going to be represented in the form of graphical presentation and then diagrammatical representation. So what are the uses and this presentation means that so it should be you see and better understanding of this object or subject, and it should also provide first-hand information, it should also helpful in future analysis, and it should also be easy in making comparison and should be very attractive. And the principles of presentation is that the data should be presented in simple form and should also arouse interest in reader, and should also concise without losing this important points is a very important thing, and should also facilitate the future analysis, and should also define and should also suggest the solution. So these are the principles of what we have to be followed while presenting the data. So tabulation. So tabulation is a thing where the data is going to be organized into different table forms, so that what will happen means that so it should be able to simplify the complex data and unnecessary details and repetition of the data can be avoided, and should also facilitate the quick comparison. It should also give some identity in the data, and it should also reveal the patterns which where the figures cannot be seen in the narrative form. So the what are the principles we have to be followed while creating the tabulation of the data means the table number should be assigned to table, and the contents of the table should have clearly defined, and steps and then footnotes, source notes, everything is going to be properly created. So precautions. The precaution means that the table should be able to suit the size of paper, and would also be captions and stuff should be properly arranged in a systematic order, and units of measurement should be defined clearly, and figures should be rounded to avoid unnecessary data. So the tables also be classified into two types, like based on the purpose and based on the content. So if the based on purpose means we are able to define the table as a reference table and a text table, and then based on the content means that, so it should be a simple one or it may be a complex table. So again, this complex table is further divided into double, triple, and then multiple tables. So very first thing is the reference table and text table. So this reference table are able to represent the original data for the reference purpose, and the text tables means we are unable to represent the data in the form of more than one or more general purpose tables, and should also going to be specified the specific point of questions will also include some ratios, percentages, averages, like that. And simple table, so simple table means where the data is going to be related to the simple one characteristic, and the double table means where the data is going to be represented to two characteristics. So double one characteristic means where each and every attribute is going to have only one characteristic, like the number, so like this. And similarly, if I go for two characteristics, so I'm taking one attribute male and female. So for this each attribute, so this is one characteristic and this is another characteristic. Similarly, for the female, so I have two my characteristics so I'm maintaining. So that's why it should be treated as a double tables. And next one is that triple and manifold table. So triple tables means where the data is relating to three characteristics, and manifold means it should be related to more than three characteristics. So like suppose similarly if I'm going to take one attribute like likely to buy, so for this I'm having three characteristics are maintained like version 1, 2 and then 3. So that's why it should be presented as the triple table. Similarly, for manifold, so if I'm going to take more than three characteristics, then it should be manifold characteristics. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.